Hello and welcome to this Android development tutorial brought to you by North Border Software. My name is Gary. In this tutorial we're going to look at the constraint layout. Now if you've updated to Android 2.3 then you're going to see the constraint layout by default. It's something that's probably worth our time just to explore in a little bit more detail. Constraint layout is very similar to a relative layout in that you position views relative to each other. The constraint is effectively the relative position. So you're going to need at least two constraints for each view, one in the horizontal axis and one in the vertical axis, and that's something we'll explore later on. As I said before, it's actually there as standard in Android Studio 2.3. You can use it on previous versions of Android. Just a few things you need to check if you're going to do that. First of all, let's look at the Service Development Kit Manager. That's the API Manager. Let's just look at the SDK. What I need to do is just go to the SDK Tools and make sure we've got the constraint layout for Android installed there as well. The other thing you need to do is actually just check the Gradle file. You need this dependency in place to ensure that the constraint layout is going to work. Also, you may be wanted to import an old project which uses the linear layout or the relative layout, and those can be converted to constraint layouts quite easily. So what I'm going to do is just show you how to do that. I'll just create a simple layout file here. I'm just going to call this test.xml, and it's a linear layout. And if you look at the XML here, you can see it's a linear layout. Just go back to the design view. If you go to the component tree and just select the layout there and just right click on it, and then you can just convert it to a constraint layout. So you can see now that that's actually converted. So very straightforward task to actually use this. So what are the benefits? Really the constraint layout is designed to work with the design editor within Android Studio. So it gives you a very visual look at how views are actually laid out, how they look on your screen and various device screens at various API levels. So it's actually a very flexible tool, and it actually negates the need to actually edit the XML. So it's certainly a very powerful and flexible way of actually creating layouts, and certainly I'm going to be using this going forward from here. Okay, so what are constraints? I think first of all we'll just get rid of this view here. I'll start with something new with this blank screen really. The first button I'm going to show you is the Auto Connect button. Now this is off by default. What I'm going to just turn this on. Unless your layout is going to be very simple, then I really don't see a need for this particular button. I rather have the control of how that of where the actual views appear on the screen. So here you've got all the views at hand. So I'm just going to look for an image view. I'm just going to drag this into the middle of the screen. You can see it's centered there. I'm just going to select an image for that. And you can see it's actually put the constraints in place automatically. Let's just have a look at the XML here. So these are the constraints. It's all relative to the parent. So it's to the bottom of the top, to the left of the parent, right of the parent, and to the top of the parent. So you can see that's very similar to what you can do with a relative layout in terms of actually defining the position of the view on the screen. And we've actually got 4 constraints. These spring notations are actually the constraint itself. Okay, so if you just select the view, you've got some properties here, and we can explore some of these properties. You might want to actually add some margins. You can see there's actually no margin here at all, so I can actually simply select a predefined margin. We'll do that here as well, here as well, here as well. I can also change the ID of the image itself. You can see how this is now developing in the XML side of things. I can also change aspects of the size from this it's just a cut down version of the property. It's the most popular one, so I can actually just match the parent here on the width on there. I can also just shrink that up back to the wrap content size as well. Other things to note here are the bias. This is all centered on the screen. I can actually just push this to one side. You can see here it's just added the bias into the XML side of things. So that gives you a very basic idea of what you can do with the view. It's worth noting here as well, this little switch here just brings all the properties into play. So these are everything that's available for the for this particular image view, and you can actually just edit values here as well if you want some more complex attributes assigned into the actual view itself. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to clear this particular view now because I want to just show you how to build constraints manually with some text views. So I'll just select that and I'll just delete that. And I'm just going to add a text view in place. So I can actually just search for that if I wanted to. So text view. Rather than scroll and everything, so I'm just going to select a text view and I'm just going to drop it into the screen. So at this actually what I want to do is actually turn this button off now, so let's just repeat that process. This is now turned off, so there's going to be no predefined constraint. So that's got its own position in the screen. There's actually no constraints in place, so actually when we come to render that screen, it's actually going to appear in the top left hand corner here. So that's something you need to bear in mind. So every view needs at least two constraints, one for the horizontal axis and one for the vertical axis, and it's often going to need more. All I need to do to add these manually is quite simply just select the view and just drag this arrow to the edge. Now we've actually just constrained it to the parent there. I'm going to just want it spread evenly across the screen, so I'm going to put one in to that side, and then I'm just going to put one into the top. What I want to do is just drag this down a little bit from the top. I can do this with margins. See this button here? This is the default margin that's put in place. You can see I've got the margins here. I could actually just change this manually. Also, if I want to just bring this down a little bit, I can just drag the thing down just to give it a little bit more space. So what I'll do now, I'm just going to change the height of this text. So I'm just going to change some of the properties of the text itself. So I need to find that particular property. So what I can do there is just bring the properties up with that switch. Same button is here. I'm just going to search for text size. So that's what I'm interested in. And I've got some predefined values in here. It's a title, so let's just make it fairly big. You can see as well that is, I really want that aligned in the separate as well, so in the center as well. So if it's text, I can find text alignment, and I can just center that text. You can see how you can actually start to work with this particular view. You would have noticed here we've actually got two screens here. This is how the screen will actually render. This is the blueprint. The blueprint has shows where the constraints are, the particular margins. So it's really a plan for how the layout will work, and this is actual visualization. So you can actually just work on just the design view, just the blueprint, or you can mix both as well. Okay, so that's our title in place. Another really useful attribute is the baseline feature. I'm just going to drop another couple of text views in place, one about there and one here as well. So what I want to do, I'm just going to attach this one to the side. I'm just going to give it a vertical constraint as well. I'm just going to drag this down, and I'm just going to give this one a little bit more margin. So I'm just going to select that. Just close this button here and go back to the view itself. I'm just going to give this a bit more space. I'm going to just change the height of this text as well, just to about 14 spatial pixels, I think will be appropriate. So view all the properties, just search for text size. and let's just make that 14. Okay, what I want to do with this view here, I don't put any constraints in place at all, but I just want to change the text size there just for a little bit higher. What I want to do is actually align the bottom of the text on this text view here with the bottom of the text on this text view. So what we do, we have a very useful feature called the baseline feature. Now if you just select the view, and you've got this button here, it says AB, and it's got a little dotted line. So I'm just going to press that, and you've got this little bubble. So I'm just going to drag the bubble over to this text view here. And what this will do, it actually just aligns the text, bottom of the text with each one. That's a really useful formatting feature. So let's just zoom in, just have a little bit of a better look at that. So you can see here the bottom of the text is aligned with the bottom of the text here. So let's just zoom out again. Okay, and we'll go on to the next little thing. So let's just kind of put another set of text views in to do a very similar thing. So just going to drag a text view here and another text view here. Just going to do a very similar thing. Let's do the text size there, and this will be I think it was 18, and this, I think these were 14, so that one's got 14 there. Okay, so the other thing I can do is actually align views to the left or the right of each other. So rather than just drag into the parent, I can just drag it a constraint there. You can see this has actually put a margin in place. Everything has a default margin. So if I just close that, I've got one constraint in place. I just want to make this margin 0, and you can see that's now aligned the left. Just to show a different way of doing this, if I just select these two views here, I've got another button up here. This is an alignment button, and again I can just align to the left here. You can see it's put that constraint in place. So there's no vertical constraint here at the moment. So we've got a vertical here, and this is to the left. I'm just going to constrain this to the baseline as well, just to make sure that those line up. Okay, so you can get a rough feel of how things actually go together. At the moment we've just aligned views with each other, and also the parent itself. You can actually bring some guidelines in place as well. So I'm going to add a horizontal guide here, and this is something I'm just going to drag it down. So I can actually align to this particular line as well. So let's just put another text view in place, and what I'm going to do is just position that there. I'm just going to put a constraint, really a vertical one, in from there, and maybe just pad that out with a little bit more margin. Okay, 24 dp, and I also need a left-hand constraint there. Let's just put a bit more margin in on that one as well, so just so you can see how the arrows are formatted on the screen. So I might want to change the size of this text view. If I just select it, I can just drag this to a specific size as well. So you can see you've got full control over fixing the size of this. Okay, so should be getting a good feel for how things are going now. So what another useful feature is, I'm just going to put a couple of buttons in actually, just working with text views. So this is just reinforcing the point. We're not seeing anything new here. So I'm just going to drag a button in here, just drag a button in here. For these buttons, they just simply need a constraint there, and a constraint there, a constraint there, and a constraint at the bottom. So you can work with different flavors of views in the same way. I'm just going to push the button in, so let's just make that 32, make this 32, and the 16 at the bottom. So if I want to just delete a particular constraint, all you need to do, you can see, you can just select the view and you can delete that constraint there, and likewise here. Similarly, if I just want to clear all the constraints on that, I can just select the view and just clear all the constraints that are in place. So I'm just going to add those back in for the moment, and this one here as well. So very simple process to actually just create your layouts. I think the other thing to show is chaining. What we do with chaining is we can actually treat views with, I guess, give them similar properties. Chaining is very similar to assigning weights to views. You may recall that I did a tutorial where we put a couple of text views in place, and we wanted each of those to occupy 50% of the screen, and then by changing the weight you can get one of those views to occupy a little bit more of the screen. We can do a very similar thing with chaining itself. So first of all, I'm just going to select everything and just clear all this screen off. So what I'll do is just going to delete everything. So we've got a blank screen again. So I'm just going to bring in let's just do it with some buttons, a couple of buttons there. Bring one in here. Okay, so I'm just going to give these a vertical constraint each, and we'll just push those down so we can actually just see what's going on the screen. Okay, so what I want to do is just select both of those, make sure they're selected. What I'm going to do now is just hover over here and just right click, and I'm going to send these horizontally. Now you can see it's actually put a chain in place, so these are kind of bonded, so we can actually just assign some weights here. So what I want is each of these buttons to occupy a full width of the screen. So the way I did that, and you do it with views in weights as well, is to take the width and just change that to 0 dp. So let's just edit that and make that 0 dp. Now the other thing we need to do now is actually assign a weight to each of those, and that's done with a property. So we have to just call the properties up, and you've got some constraints here, these properties. Now what I'm looking for is the weight. So we've got a horizontal weight here, so if I just make that 1 and just close that off, you can now see that these buttons have occupied a full 50% of the screen. Again, if I just change that, if you just select one of these, get the properties again, let's put it up, I'm just looking for the constraints, just make sure that's the right one there. So horizontal weight, let's just make that 2, just add that to be 2. And now you can see that this occupies 2/3 of the screen, and this occupies 1/3. So this is roughly how chaining works, and it's useful for orienting the layout in that way. So just go through some of the other features here. So you can change devices. So let's just kind of go to a tablet view. You can change orientation, and this is this button here, so I can change that to portrait, so you can see how that looks in portrait mode. Obviously you can change the API level here as well, just to check out how that is. So that's a few of the buttons here. We looked at the aligning, we've looked at this. This is the chaining itself. This is another way of doing it, distributing horizontally. We kind of did that manually by altering the constraints. So you can pack views in certain ways to bond them like this and form chains. So that fundamentally is it. There's a few things I just want to show, inferring constraints as well. So let's just change this back to a much more viewable device. I'm going to do select everything and just clear all the constraints here. What I'm going to do is then just put a couple of just random things in place as well. So I've just kind of dotted these on the screen. So maybe that's how you want things to look. What you can do then is just hit this button here to infer constraints, and it just put things in place automatically. You may find that flexible, you may not. Also, if things aren't right, you will get errors. We've put, obviously there's no errors here, so everything is constrained as needed. Let's just see if we can enforce an error. So you can see now, because there's no constraints in place, we've got errors. So you just have to make sure that those errors are actually taken care of. And you've got a few warnings here, but these are just around really about hard coding strings. So if you want to know messages, then they're all here as well. So that's really run through the features on the constraint layouts. I hope you agree it's a very powerful tool. I hope you're going to use it all going forward. So this is just a nice quick overview. So that concludes the tutorial now. So catch you next one. Bye for now. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe if you find this tutorial useful. All the project files and source code are available for download on my website. Thank you.